Have you ever wondered how our streets got their names? How sometimes there's more than one name for a street, one in English, one in Spanish, and how those names have evolved? Well, I'm going to begin to answer those questions today. Having looked at how street names in Gibraltar have changed and evolved over the years, it's now time to look at the eastern side of the historic centre and city of Gibraltar. The story today is how the city of Gibraltar began to expand after the Great Siege of 1779 to 1783, when most of the houses were either damaged or destroyed. And the place where it all began is right here behind me. It was Prince Edward's Gate. Prince Edward was later to become the Duke of Kent and Gibraltar's only royal governor. He also became, in due course, the father of Queen Victoria. But this gate is named after an earlier visit to Gibraltar of the royal prince, and that was in 1790 on his way to Canada. The street leading from this gate was unremarkably known as Prince Edward's Road. And it was on this street that something remarkable happened. An intruder in a house almost led to a death sentence being passed. And that intruder was a Barbary macaque. The story unfolded in the early 1920s. There were complaints about the Barbary macaques. The governor, Smith Dorrien, heard from the Chief Justice and from others who wanted all the Barbary macaques exterminated. For the resident of number 4 Hargraves Court, the destruction of all his plants by the Barbary macaques was the last straw. The macaques had an unlikely champion, the Secretary of State for War. He refused to sign the death warrant for all the macaques, all of them, all 3 of them, because the population had dwindled at that stage. It was then discovered that all 3 of the apes were female. So instead of signing a death warrant for the 3 macaques, a young apelet was imported from Morocco to amuse them and to ensure that they didn't stray into people's houses. It was a close call. Gibraltar almost ended up with no Barbary macaques. To our forefathers, this spur of Prince Edward's Road was known as La Cuesta de la Cebada, Barley Hill. Indeed, there's a house over here called Barley Hill House. But why Barley Hill? The answer is to be found on the other side of the street in this low-lying building, which was the main store for fodder for all the horses in the garrison at a time when every officer had a horse and where there were also very many other horses and mules in the fortress. The fodder that was given to the military horses was barley, la cebada. So that's why this was Barley Hill, La Cuesta de la Cebada. This road has been home to 2 different consulates at different times. This blue house behind me, known for some time as Consulate House, was where the French consulate was situated, but the French consul lived himself in Witham's Road. This fine house is where the Sprague family lived. Now, the Spragues were the US consuls in Gibraltar for over 100 years, from 1832 to 1936, and they were also important merchants. Horatio Sprague was the first of 3 generations of the Sprague family to be the representatives of the United States in Gibraltar. His son, also Horatio, was additionally a forwarding agent. He would receive letters from Morocco to be posted on from Gibraltar, and on the back of them he would add his cachet, forwarded by Horatio Sprague. Horatio Sprague Jr. married Antonia Francia. The Francias were a wealthy merchant family at the time, and the family home was here at Marble House on the corner. It's now part of the Bristol Hotel. It is rare to find coats of arms on Gibraltar buildings, and you can see the Francia coat of arms here above the door of Marble House. It's carved in marble, but then what else would you expect of Marble House? The last of the Spragues in Gibraltar was Richard Sprague, and he was a friend of John Mackintosh, so it's no surprise that John Mackintosh's brother-in-law, Anthony Woolley Dodd, when he wanted to have his book on the flora of Gibraltar duplicated and printed, that he chose Sprague and the American consulate as the place where it was going to be done. It was Dr. Hiraldi's sister who prepared the stencils. Richard Sprague never married, so it meant that he was the last of the Sprague family to be a consular representative for the United States in Gibraltar. Next door to the US consulate and the Sprague house was the residence of Sir George Gajero. He was the grandfather of the present generation at the helm of M.H. Bland Limited and Bland Limited, and it was here in this house that Joe and John Gajero grew up. The Gajeros went on to become captains of Gibraltar industry, with interests that included the cable car, the Rocketel, M.H. Bland Shipping, GB Airways, and much more. Another important resident of Prince Edward's Road was Nicholas Bassadoni, and he lived here at the corner house. Nicholas Bassadoni amassed a large library of books, and he was very proud of his library. This is one of the items from Nicholas Bassadoni's library. It is an original Treaty of Utrecht of 1713, and his signature appears here. This is another of Nicholas Bassadoni's books. It bears his name here on the cover and also on the flyleaf, and it was published in 1631. It's an Arab grammar trying to teach you Arabic. But it's challenging today because you need to learn Arabic from Latin. A descendant of Nicholas Bassadoni became a major industry player in Gibraltar. He was John Bassadoni, and his company, Gibanco, became an international leader in the field of ship cleaning and ship bunkering. And the headquarters of the company and of the group are still in Gibraltar. The downward spur of Prince Edward's Road was originally called Prince Edward's Ramp, and the name was changed by the sanitary commissioners when they reviewed street names and named those streets that had no names. The most famous residents of what was Prince Edward's Ramp were undoubtedly John and Victoria Mackintosh, who were Gibraltar's premier philanthropists, and they lived here at number 22. The house had formerly belonged to John Mackintosh's widowed mother, Adelaide Mackintosh, formerly Peacock. It later became a guest house a number of years after Victoria Mackintosh died, and it was run by Domingo Ocello. He was a drag artist and called himself Sugar. And it was very challenging at the time to be openly gay in Gibraltar. Sugar had a bar here in Governor's Parade at number 21 called the Sugar Bowl. We have been looking at properties on the street below on Prince Edward's Road associated with Gibraltarians who distinguished themselves in different ways, from captains of industry through consuls to philanthropists. This large building was erected by another of Gibraltar's philanthropists. His name today is almost forgotten. He was John Gavino. Gavino was a merchant. He was also the first US consular representative in Gibraltar. Gavino's money was used to build an old people's home for the destitute and an orphanage next door to that. And his generosity was recorded on marble plaques above the front door. But of course, as these plaques have got the inscription in Latin, they're not easily understood today. This house was built on the site of the Tudori family home, where the Tudori family had lived for many, many years. And the lane next to it had no name. So the sanitary commissioners decided to give it a name to echo the owner of this building at the time, who was Tudori. Temistio Tudori was the chief engineer and architect of the sanitary commissioners, and he was held in very high regard by the commission. His father was born in Gibraltar, but Temistio himself was born in the Azores. And the name itself actually is Minorcan and was originally Tudori. Tudori's steps never had a Spanish name because by the time an English name was given to these steps, it was the late 1890s. That's when the sanitary commissioners named the street. And at that point, no new Spanish names were being given to our streets. The most important building that Tudori built was the Sacred Heart Church, work on which began in 1874. Now, Tudori didn't charge for the work he did in designing the church. He felt it was his duty to do so. And Tudori himself died many years later, in 1914, 1 week before the outbreak of World War I. The church was built by Bishop Scandella to cater for the growing population in the upper town. At the time, the only Catholic churches in Gibraltar were the Church of St. Mary the Crowned, now the cathedral, St. Joseph's, which was built in the 1860s, and Our Lady of Sorrows, here at Catlam Bay, which was under construction. There was a major problem in finishing the Church of the Sacred Heart. Money ran out before the church had a roof. And so the church was without a roof for a number of years. And then Ferdinand Schott, a rich merchant, approached Bishop Scandella, the vicar apostolic, and he offered to build the church roof. But there was a condition. Schott, at the time, wanted to build a large block of flats opposite the church. There was an old law that dated back to General Don, whose portrait bust we can see here on the outside of the Parliament House. Now, Don wanted to ensure that there would always be a sufficient supply of drinking water for the civilian population. So he made it a legal requirement that every new house had to have a cistern created, which was large enough to hold enough water for the needs of all the people living in the house. Building a large underground cistern was not a problem for Schott. The real issue was that he needed a larger catchment area than the size of the property would allow in order to produce enough water for all the tenants of the intended property that he wanted to build. This is where the church came in. The deal that Schott made with Bishop Scandella was that he would build a roof over the church and the clergy house next to it, provided that the water collected from those roofs would then flow into the reservoir, into the underground tank of the large house he intended to build on the other side of the road. It was agreed. The church acquired a roof, and Ferdinand Schott was able to develop the large property that he intended on the other side of the road. It became known as Patio Schott, and over the front door you can see the initials FS, Ferdinand Schott. Next door to Sacred Heart Church is Prior Park School, and it was formerly the grammar school run by the Christian Brothers. Inside Prior Park School, there's a little-known relic of Arengo's palace, the mansion that was built by Juan Arengo, and it is here. This is the altar built by Arengo inside his house, and the sumptuousness of the altar is an indication of what a glorious house Arengo's palace was in its heyday, with its huge gardens above the town. When Arengo's palace was demolished, the chapel was acquired by the Christian Brothers, who placed it in the private chapel of what was then Sacred Heart Terrace. Coming back to Prince Edward's Road, this building here shows another aspect of the diverse architecture of Gibraltar. Now, for many years, this was a communal services tenement. The design of this property shows it was originally a military structure. You have a veranda running the whole length of the house, and on the side you've got individual housing units. Now, originally, these housing units did not have an internal toilet or bathroom. They had shared facilities. It was then used by the City Council to decant widows living in large flats where they were now the sole tenant, in order to allow families living in cramped conditions to enjoy better accommodation. And as a result, the property acquired a nickname. It became known as El Patio de las Viudas, the widow's patio. Behind the Patio de las Viudas was the secondary entrance to the air raid shelter built at the time of World War II by the City Council. That's why it says CCG, City Council of Gibraltar, 1939. And this was the main entrance opposite 40 Steps. Every air raid shelter had to have two entrances. So in the event of one entrance becoming blocked because of an exploding bomb, there'd always be another way out for the people taking shelter inside. The shelter today has found a new use as a car park. The shabbiness of the Patio de las Viudas contrasts sharply with the Masonic Institute, which is a few doors further up. Now, this was originally the Methodist Chapel, and later it moved to the southern end of Main Street. Prince Edward's Road is therefore an area of contrast and of considerable interest, and it dates back over more than 200 years. Prince Edward's Road was luxurious compared with parts of the Upper Town, which is what we'll be looking at in some detail next time.